Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Black British Parent Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. We have another amazing guest, Fiona Reynolds, with us today. She is a therapist. Please, Fiona, hi, thank you for coming.
Hi.
And please let everyone know what it is you do.
So, hello all. I am trained as a counseling psychologist. I graduated with a bachelor's degree back in 2010, and decided at some point in time that I wasn't ready to quite step out in the field. So I went into volunteer work initially. After about two years, I recognized, I was working with victim support at the time, and I recognized that there was such a huge burden of grief on almost everybody that I came across. And although it wasn't within the mandate then, I recognized that there were ways that I could actually work with that. Just so happens that when I left that particular charity, a vacancy came up for a national bereavement charity, and my journey with loss, grief, and bereavement began there. I recognized that during that time as well, although right in the beginning it was a lot more relaxed than it is now, there was much more flexibility as to how we supported people. One thing that was clear was there wasn't enough capacity, knowledge, awareness of the particular needs of Black people. So I decided to start my own practice and to specialize in loss and bereavement, and to offer a special place for Black people to come to.
Thank you so much. Before we get into our conversation, I've been asking our guests about their favorite film because I love movies. I know it's just off topic, but just so people can get a sense of, who you are kind of to somewhat degree. So have you got a favorite film that you like? Favorite film would be a film that you like.
Dear me.
Just put you on the spot there randomly.
Yeah, you have.
That's the point. Good.
I am a crime buff.
Oh.
Yeah, I watch far too much psychological thrillers.
Goodness.
And it's not necessarily connected to my work. It's just I find them really interesting. So Seven's at the top of the list.
Okay, I did like that one. Yes, still.
Yeah.
I haven't watched that in a while. I have to go back and watch it again now that you say that. Go on. I did like it at the time, yeah.
Yeah. I tend to think more of the actors rather than the movies first. Mm-hmm. So anything with Morgan Freeman, anything with, obviously Denzel.
Obvious. Denzel.
Idris, yeah, he's I'm still hoping one day I can invite him to dinner.
You have to ask his wife.
Cook him dinner, more importantly. It's about cooking the dinner. Those are the main ones.
Okay. I'm kind of with you there as well.
And yeah, they're like any Black female.
I don't know how Dwayne would feel about me inviting Idris over for dinner though, but
it's about the meal. It's about the dinner and the conversation.
But, I'm just saying, isn't it? Yeah. So that's wonderful, and thanks for sharing that. I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for a very long time and been procrastinating on it because of my own experiences with having experienced grief. And in speaking to you, we've known each other for a long time, and I try to always keep this professional, act like it's just a guest to come and speak, but I think it's important to include that you've helped me so much with dealing with grief, and also recognizing and understanding that grief isn't only when someone passes away. So, and this is why I know it's important to have this conversation. So forgive me, everyone, if I start crying. It's already started already. We haven't even started anything yet. Oh my gosh.
Should never have to apologize for tears.
I understand. Yeah. So, you've already answered the question, how did you get into the field of becoming a grief and bereavement therapist? Can you share with us some of the unique challenges and perspectives related to grief within our community, that is the African and Caribbean community? Generally, I mean, because we're still very much connected to back home, but as well, you know, for British African Caribbeans.
Yeah, I think it's standard, even though, you know, there are geographical distance differences. But, you know, permission to cry.
You want to go back there again? It's okay.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
it's a big one.
Yeah.
And it's symbolic of the overall lack of, or I should say, inability to connect to our emotions, that we can't give ourselves permission because we were never allowed to have that permission from as far back as childhood.
Yeah.
You know, very harsh language was used about any emotional display. And you only need to have to hold back on one for you to end up holding back on all.
Everything else, yeah, for real.
And if this is who you are expected to be, and this is who you're put upon to be from a child, then as you go into adulthood, you're never going to know any different. And what you will be carrying forward is that this is how I am. I don't know that's necessarily unique to Black people, but it's particularly impactful for Black people.
Yeah. It impacts us differently to everyone else.
It does, because there's...
But saying that, there's probably people from other cultures that might listen to this and feel like they can relate, but they perhaps might not have the space to express it in the way that we are able to right now.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
absolutely. I always have to remember and remind people that grief is universal. We all suffer loss, and we all experience grief automatically.
And respond to it differently. Well, similarly, but also slightly differently, maybe.
Well, yeah. 100% of people who suffer loss will experience grief 100% of the time. And each time, 100% of the times, for each loss is going to be different. And that's no matter where you're from, who you are, male, female, boy, girl, up, young, old, everybody.
Yeah.
But for our people, one of the things, another of the things is the sense of this burden, I should say, of shame that hovers in the background that we carry, and we don't know that we're carrying it, but it controls how we operate. We are also very contradictory as people in terms of we hold back on our emotional expressions, but yet we have an exhibitionist way about us.
Can be very passionate, yeah.
Yes. I use the word exhibitionist not as a negative, but we do put a lot of expression into our movements, our language, our behaviors, and it calls attention.
Yeah.
Which, not knowing what the culture is, not knowing really who we are as a people, will be received negatively, will seem extra, will seem going over the top. And for that alone, if you're not of the culture, you will struggle to understand, say in a therapy room, why a Black person who is very articulate, who is very clearly passionate, can't express their own. In fact, they can't even name their own
Yeah.
emotions, because you can't have passion if you don't have an emotional base.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense. And a lot of the times how we present gets misinterpreted and misrepresented in the therapy room.
I guess but sorry to cut you. I think that has a lot to do as well with how we want to be perceived in society. Do you see what I mean? Like there's levels of when I hear what you're saying, I'm thinking about people that seemingly are together, like, and if anybody sort of acts out of character or from natural emotion, it seems to bother. I think what I'm getting at is I guess my apologizing for crying or being emotional, I notice that other people have a bigger problem with it than me expressing that emotion. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, and that's connected to a sense of shame that we are working with, we don't know we have. But there's also another factor of fear that is buried somewhere deep inside as well. And it's fear of exposure. For one, we've been brought up, or if not brought up directly, but it's been filtered down to us that you need to keep everything behind doors. You need to keep everything undercover. You can't reveal who you really are, because you don't know who's watching and how they're going to use it.
Yeah.
So there is I call it fear of exposure. And there is that angle of it, but it's also exposure of what to yourself, what it is that you can't handle. Because if you have to face something that you can't manage, then another fear surfaces, and that's fear of failure.
Yeah.
And we can't afford to fail because we're already swimming upstream against the current. So things, small things are perceived as having a big consequence, because the pressure to get it right and to be right is upon us, again, from a very small young age, where we have to do better, be better, always rise to the top against all of the barriers and the everything that's been put in our way.
How can we change that, for future generations?
One by one, we stop putting that unseen, unwarranted pressure on ourselves to be anything more than human. Humans make mistakes. Humans have emotions. Human beings grow and develop through learning, step by step, stage by stage. So when we put so much pressure on ourselves to reach the end goal without having gone through the process organically, naturally, then we're working with a shell, not the entire thing. And if you think of the human body, when it forms from cells, the cells develop and multiply as time goes by, bit by bit, stage by stage. So the process happens under its own momentum. If you don't allow that to happen, then you're going to have big gaps. You're going to have organs missing and misfiring and malfunctioning. And the end result can't help itself, because it's not in control of its development. So how it's operating is how it knows to operate. And if it's not at the same level as all of the rest of the human organisms who have had time and process to fully develop, then we're putting pressure on that one single being to be
Having to make up for all the other
something
organs.
that it can't. It just doesn't have the capacity to be.
Yeah, I think as well, because my thoughts on what you're saying is that room for having explore our emotions and our feelings in that kind of respect. I can see that the younger generation are in their feels now, and the older generation is struggling with it a little bit. Do you get what I mean? Some of them are some of the older generation can hear with it and see with it, but I can see that, you know, like I've seen certain social media posts, and it's like that certain elders, certain parents are saying to their young ones, "You lot are too soft. What we had to go through, we had to endure a lot more than what you're going through now." Do you get what I mean? So that kind of I can't imagine what that does. Fortunately, the younger generation are a lot more resilient, I think, maybe. And I say that loosely, but on the basis that they will stand their ground and say, "No, I have anxiety, I have XYZ," and it seems that they seem to stand in their truth a little bit more where that's concerned. But you might think it's a bit overkill sometimes with buzzwords, etc., right? You have this conversation on a regular basis, so I'm just saying. But yeah.
Yes, and that's exactly where I was going to go. It's not enough to know the words. It's not enough to just use the label, because the learning behind that hasn't happened. You can claim anxiety, and then what? You know, you're just sitting with anxiety and
Just
sometimes
accepting
using
it
it as
an excuse, or not an excuse, but
no,
a crutch.
a crutch, an excuse, a weapon, even.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you don't have the understanding but claiming the label, and then the parents or the adults don't have the understanding but see you utilizing that label, then nobody really.
And they're definitely going to feel like it's a weapon on them when the way that it will be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't forget the parents, or you know, the generation ahead and the grandparents, they're already in a place of feeling that they're to blame.
Yeah.
You know, they're receiving blame. They're feeling shame.
Yeah.
They're feeling fear because the children are so far ahead of them
Yeah.
in so many respects. They're not able to keep up with them. So where did they fail? That's one of the things that most parents of maybe my generation.
And some of my generation.
Yeah.
There's moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the struggles of the parenting world.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think there may be this like a tendency to not acknowledge grief openly in our community?
A lack of knowledge, for a start, what grief really is. And going back to what we were saying earlier, that we, generally speaking, we weren't never taught how to manage ourselves, how to accept ourselves, how to work with adverse situations, and build up the resilience and the confidence and the self-trust, because we're given a perception of ourselves that, as you were saying earlier, that you're either weak or strong, you're either good or bad, you're either making mistakes and failing, or you're a grand success. So, for one, the knowledge of grief, even to go back before that, loss is only really associated with death. So if something significant happens in your life that is an actual loss, what I call a life loss, say a relationship breakdown, that's a case of picking up the pieces and carrying on. You're better than that. You can't let them get to you. Is the language that's used. Don't let them see you cry. Don't give them that power. So we are taught from a very early age, by example and by language, that to allow ourselves to feel our feelings suggests weakness, suggests we're giving in, suggests that we're also letting the side down. So it's not just our burden we're carrying, it's a burden of the community, it's a burden of the male or female.
Or sometimes the family.
Or it's the burden of the family, because now your business is out of doors. And nobody would know what's going on but for you. You're going to take yourself and broadcast your business. Very harsh words when all you're doing is being human. So there is that where we don't recognize our losses, for one, when they happen, as they happen, and then we don't recognize that loss automatically brings about grief, and grief is emotion-based. It's an instinctive, emotional response that can manifest in various ways.
Would that be your description of what grief is? Can you give a definition?
That's what it is. That is what it is.
While you're saying that, I'm just thinking of all the times that someone's going through grief and they're being told to suppress their feelings, so they're not able to experience the grief that they need to in order to be able to... Because I don't know if healing is the right thing to say, but to grow through it. Do you get what I mean?
So
it kind of stunts that.
Yes, it absolutely does. I'll go even further back. As I said, we don't even recognize our losses because the description about a change that happens it's not correct. It's not accurate. So first and foremost, not even recognizing a loss, even if you are inclined to grieve, to engage with your grief, if you don't recognize a loss, then you're just feeling emotions for emotion's sake and not knowing what that's associated with. So again, you're going to suppress it because it's out of place and it's exposing, and you don't want to let the side down.
Yeah.
And you don't want to answer any questions. Yeah. You want to move on because that's what we're encouraged to do. So when we do have a loss that we can openly, with permission, engage with, that's going to be a death, which is final. Now, as much as all change is final, and that's why we have a loss, we can't step away from the fact that although changes happen in our worlds, our inner worlds, we carry on. We absorb it and we carry on, grief aside, because we keep living. Death is much more marked, and so it's much bigger, and therefore it's easier.
It's more prominent. It's more,
It stands
it's not,
out.
but it appears to be.
It appears to be. So the question of grief presenting itself as a natural process is still strange if it's not about death. What would be helpful for people to understand is that it doesn't have a big presence. It doesn't have to have a big presence. Grief, that is, doesn't have to have a big presence. It doesn't have to be like this block of bricks, this basket full of bricks is falling down on your head and crushing you, because there's an anticipation that grief will be overwhelming, that it would be too much to bear, and that it is a really awful experience. Once we learn that there's an emotional response, then being connected to yourself is the beginning of allowing those emotions to surface and for you to engage with them. Whichever of the key emotions there are smaller emotions that will come through. And once you are connected to yourself, then you don't actually need to label it as, okay, this is grief, okay, this is for that, this is for the other thing. It's being emotionally engaged on a continual basis that really helps the grief process. So when you are able to identify what your loss or losses have been, the grief that shows, the feelings of grief, the emotions of grief that you're then carrying, you can make the associations a lot more easily. But then what is also happening in those associations is you're developing a meaning for your loss. You're attaching a meaning to your loss, and you are adjusting to the changes that the loss has brought to your life. And as you adjust over time, you're then becoming bereaved, which is a state of living with grief.
So many thoughts. Because, again, I'm not to be making it be about myself.
Why not?
Because this is about us, isn't it? But to then hopefully use my experiences perhaps to assist others, as well as assist myself, right? I'm thinking about being able to acknowledge after having such a significant loss. For the sake of conversation, my mum passed away 7 years ago, and it's her birthday tomorrow. Yes.
Oh, wow.
So I was thinking maybe we shouldn't be doing this today, but here we are. And then I think having gone through that experience of what that was like, because our relationship was quite complex, which, you know, was quite complex. And then to have somewhat better understanding, because I never really understood what grief was. I had some idea it was associated, as you'd say, the typical understanding of it being with someone dying. And to then have that experience, I mean, I've had bereavements around me. I mean, when my granddad passed, that was hard hitting, because I grew up with him, just that was my granddad, and loved him dearly and spent a lot of time with him. And then to have my mum pass away 6 months later and have other grandparents die, it was something I've never quite understood. So in terms of it happening that way, and I know it's happened to many people that way, it's not nothing you know how to prepare for, but having gone through the experience, and it still is taking me some time to heal from it. And I mean heal in terms of the healing. I'm not expecting to be healed. I know it's something, I understand now that it's something that you kind of learn to live with in some way. But then to go through that kind of experience and then to be able to acknowledge it with, for example, friendships loss, you know, and being estranged from family members and those kinds of losses. And it's very much a similar feeling. It's that heavy a feeling. And it's interesting because the same way that people are expected to hold back their emotions with a loved one passing away, in many ways it feels very similar, where you're expected to overlook relationships with family for the sake of staying in that relationship, so you don't have that grief or that feeling of being estranged or separated. There's levels where it feels like you're very much manipulated to accept certain things or cover things up for perceptions. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah. There's a lot in that.
Yes, there is.
Quite a lot in that.
My apologies.
I think each one of them need their own podcast.
Definitely. So we're definitely having her back again to have another conversation going. But what I'm saying is we don't have to necessarily speak on that so much. But when you're saying what you're saying, it's just reminding me of those significances. Hey family, we hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to stay up to date with all things Black British Parent, we've got the perfect way for you to do just that. Join our mailing list and be the first to know about new episodes, exciting news, and upcoming events. It's super easy to sign up. Just head over to our website and into your email. Don't miss out on the latest from Black British Parent. Join our community today. Now, back to the show.
Well, all right. I think something that we absolutely have to broach while we're doing this is familial relationships. So, as I was saying, death is final, and there is, to some extent, an ability to close the door, as in the relationship you had or wanted to have. It ends at the point of death. You're still associated. There's still some entanglement and attachment. That's the right word, with a person that carries on forever, because your loss is permanent. Your grief will be permanent. It's just how it shows up that changes, as in changing from grieving and being in the process of grief to living bereaved. So you get to a point where you can recognize within yourself that, okay, fine, I am okay at this point, for now, for today even. That doesn't happen as easily when it comes to relationships. There is a particular type of loss called ambiguous loss, which is mostly applicable to relationships where the relationship is broken for some reason. And I'm thinking, most particularly parental relationships. And even more than that, one of the parents is no longer a part of your life as a child. And when I say child, even an adult child feels this. So they're not dead. They're still alive. They're still functioning. So, but the relationship is not happening. You're going to grieve. You're feeling the loss because there has been a change. The nature by which the rules of the relationship that you had before no longer apply, because they're no longer in place, and because more often than not they choose this other party either is dishonoring the nature of your relationship by their behavior, their attitudes, the way they speak to you, and being quite not having a productive relationship. So your interactions are unhealthy, and often you have to take a decision that you have to set boundaries, and you need to pay attention to how you look after yourself in that relationship. And that may mean not interacting or reducing, managing the type of interactions that you have with them. You asked me earlier, how do we ease that pressure from, having to conform to expectations that don't belong to us? That's really what you're asking. And sometimes you do have to cut off, cut the cord, because the best way you can look after, you can change, you can break patterns and make changes, is to start looking after yourself. It begins with you as an individual, and how you look after yourself, how you reach your place of balance within and remain connected to yourself is how you manage your relationships, and that will include family relationships too. But back to ambiguous loss. So, you've had somebody who's left your life or is so disruptive to your life that they need to be kept outside the fence, basically. You're going to grieve, but you feel you can't grieve because the person hasn't died. The relationship has not been terminated as in, you've each decided, no, I don't want anything to do with you. That's not been declared. But the person is no longer an active part of your life. So you're betwixt and between. You're yearning for the contact, but you have no way of making contact. Or you're yearning for the contact to be in a particular way, but you know it's not going to happen.
And what if you're not yearning for that contact, but you're still in that grief sort of experience?
You're still having a grief experience. But I think there is this thing where people expect grief to show up in a particular way. And if it doesn't show up, if they're not experiencing what they think they should be experiencing, then they dissuade themselves that they're not grieving or they're not feeling anything. So again, the way to manage that is to acknowledge what you're feeling, even if it is you're feeling nothing. But nobody ever feels nothing, really.
Thank you for giving a response to my complex, loaded question or statement, I suppose, in some way. How can cultural factors influence the expression and understanding of grief? And what role does this play in a therapeutic sort of process or practice?
Okay. I'm going to choose death as an example. It's obviously one everybody can connect to quite easily. There are a lot of traditions and practices that our culture have around death, and they're all useful. Used well, used healthily, applied healthy, they can be very productive, very beneficial to the process of grief. But there are many of us, and I'm saying us, even of my generation, I'm a generation ahead of you, not old. But there are many persons that are around now that don't even understand what a tradition is, much less that certain things, practices that are in place are part of a tradition. So knowledge is key. Why does this thing exist in this particular way? Why must this be done? Sticking with death, if we look at mourning, the mourning process, that's not a word I hear at all now. But a tradition of death is a period of mourning where the family that's involved wears black for an entire year, and then they gradually move into not complete black, but like darker tones, gray mixed with white, and over the following year, the tone becomes lighter, literally.
What culture is this?
This is our culture. This is...
For so long they wear black for. I didn't know that.
I want to say it's our culture, but I think it's the culture of death.
Okay.
It would be a better explanation that we did at one point adhere to.
Do you think colonialism has had an impact on that? Okay.
Yeah.
That's another topic, but yeah, go on.
Well, I will say the Irish have a very, very strong death culture. And a lot of our early practices are aligned with the Irish culture.
Okay.
So yeah, we would have dark black shades, the windows would be blackened. So you would literally be living in a world of black, which would signify that you're mourning. Now, there's a reason for this. It's not necessarily to isolate you, but to highlight your needs in those months, that you are in need of particular type of support.
It's interesting you say that, because as you were saying that, sorry, stick a pin there, was that the idea nowadays, it seemed to be a negative thing to wear black at funerals or in that kind of circumstances. It's seen as like, especially with the whole race sort of issues and perspectives and the meanings of words, etc. But it's also interesting, like if we look at what do they call it, color therapy, black is a color of protection. So as you're saying that, that's what I'm, yeah.
And you see how things get misinterpreted and misrepresented later on down the line, because this thing about black not being,
It's not the only meaning, but it's
no,
one
I
of
know.
the color meanings.
But this trend, I
Yeah.
should say, of not wearing black, it's being supported when people leave instructions on their death. Oh, don't wear black to the funeral.
And
I
that's,
don't
you
want.
want to respect their wishes, so yeah.
Well, you do, but you're also being robbed of your agency to
I guess
grieve,
so,
to express your grief, because this is what I'm saying. We have these traditions and practices that have meaning, benefits to us, and if you don't know where they're coming from, you don't know the origins, you don't know the history, then you're going to misuse it and end up really taking a lot away from yourself, not improving. So not imposing, because it is an imposition. When somebody says, you do what I say, yeah, it's my funeral, but I'm telling you to do what I say. That's an imposition. Not it's received as a request, but actually I'm telling you how you are going to grieve me.
Yeah.
I don't have
And no one
the
can
right
argue
to do
with it
that.
because they're gone.
Right.
Like, you
But
can't-
there's also
yeah.
this thing about you have to be a certain way about somebody who's died. You can't talk ill of the dead. You can't. This is the language that's always used. You have to really kowtow to them. And when sometimes we have lived, we as a people have had very oppressed lives from childhood. When you have separated from this oppression, lived life as an adult, what does that make you when on death this person immediately seizes control of your agency by dictating to you what you wear, how you express your grief, when, how long for. Yeah, don't be sad. You're not allowed to cry. You're not, 3 months. Grief should only last for 3 months. Again, coming back to the human organism, we don't, by nature, we can't operate like that. So we're still having to deny ourselves the right to be ourselves because we don't understand traditions and the origins of them. Another one is 9 nights.
Yes.
9 nights is, anybody you say that to nowadays, it's like, oh yeah, party time. But 9 nights had a very specific purpose, and that's definitely from back home, from the Caribbean.
Would you say that's more Jamaican than other islands?
Yes, but primarily because of where the slaves that brought those practices in is because of their learning, where they came from, that particular group of slaves. That knowledge kind of was shared and put into practice. So it's like a compilation of different cultures that now have one that took root in Jamaica because people came together.
And just
then-
a point of reference, enslaved Africans, because that concept of human beings being slaves, it wasn't a choice. It wasn't, yes, fair enough, they were born into it, but I just want to, because people have different perspectives, I just wanted to include that in there too. So my
I appreciate
apologies.
that. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And it spread to the different islands because you have persons that were had no control over their movements, were shifted from place to place, and they brought these practices with them. So 9 nights really is about the spirit, allowing a combination of the spirit, honoring the spirit, and honoring, allowing for the person to be honored, the person who died to be honored. So the practice was to have the person lie in state in a room in the house, in their house, and be visited over a period of 9 nights. And obviously, this is something a lot of people outside of our culture don't understand. And again, it comes from this. You don't have to know the person to honor the person who's died. You don't have to have a personal connection. So one of the things that would happen over the 9 nights period is visitors from all different parts will come, pay their respects, literally visit the body, say prayers over the body. The doors front and back would be open, the windows front and back would be open, and that would allow the spirit to roam freely. So it would be prayers and singing and gathering, just fellowship, what's now called fellowship. But what's the real significant change, apart from the fact all of that's ignored now, is that people bring gifts for the family. They would care for the family. They'd bring food. So if somebody's walked 2-3 days from their village across the island to get to this house, they've got something for the family, because the family is not expected to
provide for everyone else.
Provide for everyone, or even for themselves, because they need to be grieving. It's just turned completely on its head. Because people don't know what 9 nights is about, and the research isn't being done.
And the traditional culture isn't properly being shared and passed on.
Down.
Yeah,
exactly. The information got lost somewhere along the line.
So much things. Yeah,
exactly. And I think some of that is, again, the discomfort that you mentioned earlier, where you're crying. And you're conscious about crying, not because you're uncomfortable with crying, but because you're aware there's a discomfort about what is happening outside of you that people will feel. So you change your behavior.
Thank you. We are running out of time, but I'm going to ask you one last thing off the back of what we was talking about, because that was going to be my next question, in terms of like the specific coping mechanisms and rituals within the African Caribbean community in dealing with the impact in dealing with grief. So you mentioned one of them, for example, the 9 night. Are there other things, or
the washing of the body? That's quite significant.
Embalming,
or even just dressing, because obviously in olden days embalming wasn't a thing, but burials happen quite fairly quickly.
I think I've watched a couple of films, like set period films of African American culture, and they would literally have, in American culture back in the day, they would have the body in the house, and I'm just like, goodness, like, I can't imagine or even fathom that it's so far removed from where we're at today.
Death was a part of everyday living. Yeah, it still is, but we've niced it up to such an extent. We've sanitized life because of that discomfort that we recognize people feel. And that discomfort exists because they were never given permission to recognize emotions as a part of their existence. And you have an emotional response to all of this. And, having death under your feet, quite literally, as a part of your daily existence, allows you to process what your life is around that death, because you do keep on living. But because now death has been taken away from us, the mechanics of death has been taken away from us. We call in the what do you call them?
Undertakers?
The undertakers, thank you. You call in the undertakers. The minute somebody has died, that's the first call a lot of people make. And many adults even are lost as to, well, what do I do now? It's so separated from daily life. But when death was in the home, when death was a part of our family, when death was a part of our everyday knowledge, as it should be, you wash the body, you lay the body out on the dining table. You were involved and engaged with everything that happened as a result of that death or associated with that death. So your processing was ongoing. Now you have to actively engage with what you recognize to be the process, because there's been such a vast chasm created. That separation has taken away so much that is natural about life and death, that we now see it as an enemy. Hence the resistance and the discomfort.
Definitely.
And the impact isn't just about how we grieve, it's about our self-perception as well.
I can see that especially when you say like life and death. I'm being as a professional birthing assistant, I can see, how we perceive conception, birth, pregnancy, the whole reproduction process. Yeah, we don't see it the same way as perhaps we should.
Yeah.
I say should, Lucy. I don't want to put a should in anything. Or could, maybe.
No, I hear that. I try not to use should as well, but it's warranted.
And equally, you can see it on like the beginning and the end of what we call life. Fiona, thank you so much. We have to bring you back again as soon as possible to finish the conversation, because we ain't done. We are not done. Please let our listeners know how they can get in touch with you, please.
Okay, so I'm terrible at keeping the numbers in my head, but I'm happy for you to post my number. Mm-hmm. My email is fiona.lifeandloss@gmail.com. So I can be contacted that way. I have an Instagram, poorly kept, unfortunately. But I have an Instagram page. It's Grieve365 Freely. And the intention is to post information on that with regard to education, education around grief and loss.
100%. Do you have a message for Black British parents, please, before we leave, before we go?
The work Black British Parent, the organization, is doing is supreme, it's paramount, it's needed, it's necessary. It's about helping us to recognize that each one of us has the capacity, even if we don't recognize it, but we impact on each other, and more significantly, the children that we come across. If we're not a parent now, we're probably likely to be a parent in some form or other, even if you haven't given birth or don't intend to give birth. Every child that you encounter makes you a parent. You adopt parent form in some way by having that encounter, and it's crucial that you know who you are, because the impact you have on that child is lasting all the way through to adulthood.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Guys, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.